Hello, everyone, and welcome back to American Ultra Stock. Thank you so much for tuning in, and you may notice that today I am, for the first time, basically, by myself. Unfortunately, Yuri was not able to record at the time, but we still thought that it would be a good idea to get a video out for you guys as soon as possible to go over the Olympic roster, which dropped this morning on the Today Show at around 8 a.m., and there's a lot to discuss. So without further ado, let's just get into it, and we'll start with the goalkeepers. I think this is probably the most straightforward group out of them all. You've got Patrick Schulte from the Columbus Crew, who's been the starter for most of the process, and Gaga Slonina from Chelsea, technically, but he was at Eupen in Belgium on loan this past season and is likely to go out on loan again this next season, hopefully to Strasbourg and Ligue 1. And it's a pretty straightforward group. Like I said, Schulte's been the starter the entire time. Gaga Slonina has basically been the backup the entire time. When he was released, there was a couple camps that Eupen didn't release him for because they needed him at club level. But luckily, he's back at Chelsea, and I mean, we all know they don't have any plans for him this coming season. So it was the perfect opportunity for him to come to the Olympic group. Contrary to some reports, actually, there were some people saying that he wouldn't be released, but thankfully he is here as a backup. It's definitely our top two options and two very strong options. If Schulte were to, for some reason, go down, I'm very confident in Slonina's ability to step in for him. The other option really that may have had a shout was Chris Brady from the Chicago Fire, but I don't think he's good enough to overtake either of these two players at the time being. Whether he has more potential, that's a different story. But right now, you want to bring the best you can bring to have the best chance at winning. And I don't think Chris Brady does that more than these two players. And we already know the Chicago Fire would not release him to be an alternate, which I assume they were asked about, given the composition of the alternates, which we'll get into at the end. But those are the goalkeepers. Now let's jump into the defenders, where there definitely are a lot more talking points. Maximilian Dietz is the first one listed here, plays for Greuther Fürth in the second Bundesliga of Germany. He is a US veteran at the youth level and returns after making several appearances in the cycle. Nathan Harriel is there as the only right back in the roster, plays for Philadelphia Union. Miles Robinson, the first of the Overage Players from FC Cincinnati. We know him as a USMNT veteran. He was at Copa America. John Tolkien is here as a left back, presumably the starter from New York Red Bulls. Caleb Wiley will be his backup from Atlanta United. They've been the two left backs the entire process, the entire cycle. And then Walker Zimmerman, the second overage spot and probably the captain of the team when he's on the pitch from Nashville. Of course, we already know him and Miles are the two USMNT veterans from this group of defenders. And we'll start out with the center backs, talking about Miles and Walker. I think they're pretty straightforward picks. This entire process, before we knew the release issues, and we'll get into that after we dive in through the picks, I think it made sense to bring two overage players in the center back position, because if you look at the age eligible players in that position, it's one of our weakest position groups, and center backs are so important, especially at a level such as this. I mean, if you don't have good center backs, we're not going to go far in the tournament. So it definitely makes sense to bring Walker, to bring Miles. On looking at it in hindsight, maybe I would have done something a little bit differently with the overage spots, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the video. But this is a very solid center back group. Max Dietz over Jalen Neal is going to be a big talking point. As we're recording this, we still do not know whether Jalen Neal was a club release issue or whether he just simply wasn't called. It could very likely be either of those. But either way, I respect Dietz. I respect the decision. I'm one of the few who actually rates Dietz above Neal. Maybe not for potential, but for right now, I think he's absolutely the better player. Both of them, funnily enough, are coming off injuries. So I think either one works. I expect Dietz to be the third center back behind Zimmerman and Miles, and I think he's more than capable of doing that. And we've seen that with Greuther Fürth this past season and with the US U23s in this Olympic cycle. Now onto the fullbacks, which is definitely a bit of a concerning one, because Brian Reynolds, who has been the starting right back the entire process, was not released from his club with Sterlo because one of two reasons, really. The first one is they don't have any depth in the right back position. If they didn't have Reynolds, they would have to start a pretty mediocre and old right back who doesn't really get any game time for them. And we do know that the Belgian league season does start before the Olympics are over, so he would have missed a couple of games. I understand the decision. The other one is maybe they're looking to sell him. There has been some rumors that clubs all around Europe have been interested in him, and they want to preserve the value of him, because if he were to go to the Olympics and get hurt, his asking price would go down drastically. But that leaves us with Nathan Harriel, who has joined the cycle, I think in the second camp or so, as the backup right back, now steps into being the starter. You can probably tell by the jerseys in my background, I am a Philadelphia Union fan. I watch Nathan Harriel week in, week out. I like him. If it was ideal, I would have had him as the third fullback. Since he is so versatile, he can play anywhere along the back line, really, although he is a primary right back. I would have had him as the backup to both fullback positions and maybe even a fourth center back in a pinch. But without Reynolds, our hand was kind of forced here. Personally, I would have used an overage spot at right back, and I'll get into that a little bit later, like I mentioned. But I just think it's a little bit concerning only having one out-and-out right back in the roster, especially since he's probably, if you look at talent, there's a reasonable shout to say he might be the worst player on the team. Not that that's saying he's a bad player, but there's a lot of talent on this roster. Left backs are pretty straightforward. It's been Tolkien and Wiley the whole process. Jonathan Gomez, maybe some people might say has a shout, but he hasn't been with the team at all this entire cycle, and he was asked to be an alternate, but did decline, and it makes sense. He's probably going to be switching to Mexico, which is unfortunate, but it makes sense for him career-wise. So now let's get into the midfielders. We have Gianluca Busio from Venezia in Italy, was a standout for them, helped them get promotion back to Serie A for this coming season. So he'll be playing in a top 5 league. It's definitely one to watch out for in the Olympics and next season. Benjamin Cremaschi from Inter Miami, a little bit of Messi prop here. I think maybe there are some more deserving players, but he has been with the team for most of the cycle and he keeps his spot. Jack McGlynn from the Philadelphia Union. I think the Union are the only MLS club to have multiple players on this roster. So the Union Academy producing as always. McGlynn, like Busio, has been part of this team the entire process. No surprise here. Georgi Mihailovic. This is the surprising one. Georgi Mihailovic takes up the third and final overage spot on this roster from the Colorado Rapids. Of course, he did have a failed stint in the Eredivisie with AZ Alkmaar. He's come back and torn up MLS. So in terms of quality, he's probably going to be the leader in the midfield, especially at the 10 position, since he is the only one within this midfield group that can play the 10. There are a couple of the forwards that can do so as well. But now the final midfielder and the man who has been the captain for the entire cycle, Walker Zimmerman, might take that role now that he's here as an overage player. But it could also be Tanner Tessman from Venezia as well as Gianluca Busio, although rumors have it that he will be heading to Inter Milan this coming transfer window and will probably be loaned out to Torino is my best guess. It could be any club within Serie A. There's even been some Prem interest, but I think it makes sense for him to go to Torino. He's the lone 6 in this roster, which is a little bit concerning. Aiden Morris, formerly of the Columbus Crew, now of Middlesbrough in the EFL Championship, was not released, which I think we all knew was going to be the case once he did make the transfer, which is very unfortunate. I'm not the biggest fan of Aiden Morris. I don't really rate his potential too highly, but in terms of quality right now, he's definitely worthy of being in the roster. And it's unfortunate to not have his presence, especially since Tanner Tessman is now the only 6, and there are some concerns, especially due to his speed or lack of speed, of him being the only 6. I think he would work better in a kind of a double pivot with Aiden Morris next to him, but it's probably going to be him and Busio. They have that experience at club level. We'll see how that goes. It's still a pretty strong group. Now, with that being said, I don't think some of these decisions make sense. Again, I'll talk about the overage players after going through the full roster, but Mihailovic is a very good player for this level, don't get me wrong. I just don't think it makes the most sense to use the overage spot here, especially when you have Diego Luna, who is such a good player, showed why he deserves to be on this roster with a goal and 3 assists in his last game with RSL, taking the snub personally. I think he should have been here. He's very close to, if not the same level as Mihailovic. I think there's more pressing needs for the overage spots, but Mihailovic will be the leader of the midfield here, along with Tessman. And the other complaint I have is Benjamin Cremaschi. He has potential. I mean, we know USSF like him. He was even in a main team USMNT camp last year, which was, I think, a little bit crazy, a little bit of a tactical recruiting battle, although it turned out that Argentina, his other option, didn't even want him. Cole Bassett from the Colorado Rapids was told actually that he was going to be on the roster, but apparently they changed their mind at the final minute. I'm not sure if that's due to Kramaski taking his spot, or maybe a release issue with Busia Venezia. Maybe they didn't know if he was going to be released. But regardless, I think Cole Bassett should be here instead of Benjamin Kramaski. There's also Rokas Bukštis, who I think should as well, is better than Kramaski, but he wouldn't have been released regardless by Hajduk Split. They came out and said that before USSF even started compiling the roster, so it's a bit of a shame there. But either of those players would have been better. Not much we could do about Bukštis, but Cole Bassett definitely should have been there instead of Kramaski. I think it's a shame for him and Luna, who have both been so good in MLS this season. And now, on to the forwards. Paxton Aronson, the first one, one of the players who I alluded to that can also play at the 10 position, now playing for Utrecht in the Eredivisie. He was at Vitesse on loan from Eintracht Frankfurt, as you can see in the jersey behind me. This past season was basically the only good player for them. They ended up getting relegated because they weren't a good team and they had a very large points deduction, but he still stood out as a good player, and I'm looking forward to see what he can do at Utrecht this next season alongside his Olympic teammate now and club level teammate Taylor Booth, also from Utrecht. He's been there for a while, had a breakout season 2 years ago, but has been riddled with injuries this past year. It's nice to see him there because he was, at the start of the cycle, one of the first names on the roster. But like I said, injuries got to him this past season, and there was even some concerns that he might not make the final cut. But it's good to see him here. He also can be deployed as an 8 or a 10, but I expect to see him on the wing because he is listed as a forward here, and just because I think that makes sense due to the roster composition. You have Duncan Maguire as the next one, the only out-and-out 9 on the roster, which is a bit of an issue. He's from Orlando City. He's been doing pretty good in MLS. He had a breakout season last year in his first professional year and has had some interest from Europe. It's very likely that he will make a move there sooner rather than later, which he should do because he is on the older side for this roster, one of the older players here. Next up, Kevin Paredes from Wolfsburg in Bundesliga. He emerged as a bit part player for them, but had a nice little run or two where he started a lot of games in a row for them. A very good player. There were some concerns whether he would be released or not, but I think he's definitely one of the best players in terms of quality on the roster. There were even some claims that maybe he should have made the Copa America team, but I think it does make sense to have him here at the Olympics as one of the standout players. And then likely starting on the other wing alongside Paredes is Griffin Yao from Westerlo in Belgium, similar to Brian Reynolds, same club, but he was released because they actually do have depth in the wing position, which they don't have at right back. So I'll just clear that up quickly. Griffin Yao has been an excellent player, had a huge breakout season last year in the Belgian Pro League, and I'm looking forward to see what he can do. He was very good as well in his limited calls for the U23s. Now, my issue with the forwards group is this. We only have one striker here, and it's Duncan Maguire. It's not that Maguire is a horrible player necessarily, but in terms of his technical quality, it's definitely lacking a little bit. And I think it would have been better to bring two different types of strikers. Now, you can argue that we do have that because in qualifying, Paxton Aronson did play the false 9 quite a bit, and he did win the Golden Boot and Golden Ball in that tournament. Also played there a little bit in the U20 World Cup. But I just think it's probably better. I would still have Paxton on the roster, but I think it'd be better to have two out-and-out strikers. We see Johan Gomez on the alternates list. He's been part of this group for a while now. I don't know if I would have chosen him. Personally, I think I would have used an Overage spot on a different player, someone who's a different type of player, a different type of striker to Maguire, just so we have a little bit of versatility up top, because having him as the only out-and-out 9 is very concerning because he hasn't proven that he can score goals at this level. He has a couple against slightly weaker opposition in the U23s, but against France, when we played them, he was very poor. He was very poor against Japan as well in the most recent friendly that we had. I have some concerns there, but otherwise the winger group looks fantastic. So now let's talk about the alternates really quickly before diving into the overage situation. We have Josh Atencio from the Seattle Sounders. He's been with this group a couple of times. Makes sense as a backup midfield option. Jacob Davis, commonly known as Jake Davis from Sporting Kansas City, a versatile player. He primarily plays right back, but he also can play in center mid, which he's been doing both of for Sporting Kansas City this season. Solid player, but you can tell based on these alternate selections that there was a lot of players who were not released. You have Johan Gomez, who I mentioned already, as the backup striker option. Can also play at the 10 if needed. He's kind of more of a false 9 player, a bit of a center forward instead of an out-and-out striker. And then you have John Polskamp from Sporting Kansas City as well. he's the backup goalkeeper here if one of the two were to get injured. Like I said, Chris Brady would not have been released as an alternate, and I think it makes more sense to include Pulskamp here as a player who most likely will not play than give the spot to one of the U20s and just ruin their summer for them, because we do have the CONCACAF U20 Championship at the same time as the Olympics this summer. I expect the roster to be out for that soon, and we will have a video covering that when the roster does drop. But I think it's better for some of the top players in that age group to stick to that age group and be standout performers for that team, as opposed to just being an alternate and kind of wasting their summer, not really doing anything national team wise. Like I said, I mean, you can tell by these alternates, no slander on any of these players, but you can tell that there are players who were not released. Jonathan Gomez, like I already said, Cole Bassett, and Diego Luna all declined alternate spots. They were offered those positions. Gomez will probably be switching to Mexico, as I mentioned. Luna could be the same, and Bassett, I don't blame any of these players for declining the alternate spots. I mean, Bassett was told he was on the roster and then got left off last minute. I would be mad if I was him, and same for Luna. There's no reason why he should have not made the cut. It's definitely the most obvious snub in terms of the players here. There were also some other players that are of age, like Malik Tillman and Ricardo Pepi, who did not get released by PSV. They had the opportunity to choose between Copa America or the Olympics. They both chose Copa America, which is a little bit unfortunate given their performances. I mean, Pepi missed a lot of big chances in the tournament. I think he actually leads Copa America right now for big chances missed. And Malik Tillman barely got any minutes. I mean, he only came in like the last 5 minutes of the game against Uruguay. So it maybe would have been better for them to be at the Olympics, but hindsight's 2020. There's nothing we can do about that. So now let's talk a little bit about the overage situation. Now, like I mentioned, when we went over the roster, we have Miles Robinson and Walker Zimmerman as the center backs, and we have Georgi Mihailovic in the midfield. Now, this entire process, I and Yuri as well have been saying that we want to have 2 center backs and a striker as our overage options, just because those are the weak points of this group. However, when you look at the release problems, with Brian Reynolds in particular not being released, I think one of the spots should have gone to a right back, and more specifically Dewan Jones, because he wasn't at Copa America. He's been with the USMNT in the past, but he didn't make the final cut for that roster. Instead, they chose Shaq Moore for some reason. I guess he would also be an option, but I mean, I think we all know how everybody feels about Shaq Moore. He's a horrible player. Dewan Jones is better, and he's more versatile, which is key. With an 18-man roster, as you can see, there's a lot of limited spots. There's not a lot of players we can take. Versatility is key, which is why, like I said, when we talk about the defenders, I wanted Harriel originally as the third fullback because he is so versatile, the most out of all the fullbacks that we could have brought. I think Dewan Jones would have made sense as an overage player, just because I don't trust Harriel as the only right back in the camp, because if for some reason he isn't playing well, there's not really an option to bring in. Jonathan Gomez, who we left off, had played right back in the past at the U20 World Cup and did a solid job, but Caleb Wiley and John Tolkien have never played right back in their careers, so there is a bit of a concern there. And all the center backs as well, they're out and out center backs. They can't really play fullback. Maybe if we had brought an overage player like Austin Trusty, would he have been released? Probably not, but he at least can play as a fullback, as a left back, which would have definitely helped in terms of versatility. For the overage players, I would have brought Dewan Jones instead of one of the center backs, probably instead of Miles, just because he was at Copa America. And I think it's a little bit unfair to FC Cincinnati to have him at both, especially considering their injury crisis at the center back position. And I mean, Walker Zimmerman, he's perfect for this position. He wasn't with the main USMNT this summer. He's a good leader. He has first team experience, even though he hasn't been with the group as of late. I think he's the perfect player here. Bring in Dewan Jones as a backup fullback. Leave off one of Wiley or Tolkien. Probably Tolkien if you're looking for versatility, since Wiley can also play as a winger, but the winger group is also stacked. So maybe trust Tolkien, who's probably a better fullback as of right now, but I think that makes the most sense. And then the other change I would have made is, I already mentioned this, bring Luna in for Georgi Mihailovic and use the final spot on a striker. Now, it does have to be said that US Soccer did want to bring an overage striker. They asked Coventry about Haji Wright. They asked Monterrey about Brandon Vasquez. They even asked Seattle Sounders about Jordan Morris for some reason. And of course, Ricardo Pepi, who I already mentioned, they asked PSV about him. 4 options. It was clear that they wanted an overage or a better, more proven striker, but unfortunately they were denied at all opportunities. Jordan Pefok, I'm not sure if they asked about him, but he's the one who I'm seeing some people say maybe should have been here. However, he is a similar enough player to Maguire where I don't know if it's worth bringing. Also, he just started preseason back at Union Berlin after a loan away from the club, so I do think it's better for him to stay at preseason and earn his spot back in the Union Berlin team. The player who I would have brought is actually Jesus Ferreira. Now, I know he's been struggling with injuries himself, as have a couple of the players on this roster, but I just think that he brings something different that Maguire doesn't have at the striker position. He's more of a playmaker, kind of like a Johan Gomez, but better, since he plays a little bit deeper, creates more chances, and he has a lot of USMNT experience, for better or for worse. He scored 15 goals for the national team. I just think it would have been better for Overage Players to bring Walker Zimmerman, Daewon Jones, and Jesus Ferreira. So we have a little bit more versatility and depth at the right back position and at the striker position. Now, finally, to close out this video, I think we already talked about all the surprises, the snubs, Diego Luna, Jalen Neal, some of the overage ones being the main ones. I think the only thing left to talk about really is how the Olympics will actually go. Now, in our group, we have France, who we faced in a friendly, drew them 2-2, very good result, the best one that this group has had the whole cycle. We have Guinea, who we beat 3-0, although it must be said they have a lot stronger roster at the Olympics than they did when we played them. I mentioned it in Tax Stream, if you watch that, Tactical Manager TV, that we did beat Guinea 3-0, but like I said, their roster is going to be a little bit different, a little better. They have Naby Keita, probably their best player on the national team level, of course, a former Liverpool player, as we all know. So they're going to be a little bit of a challenge. And then the final team is New Zealand. The only player who I'm excited to watch for them, and I hope he's on the roster, I haven't seen if they release their final cut or not, is Tyler Bindon, the American dual national. I've been high on him for a while now. I wish he was with our Olympic team, truthfully, because I think he's that good of a player, and we ended up losing him to New Zealand. He's been with their senior national team, but he is still age eligible for the Olympics. He's pretty young. I think he's still 19 or 20, and I'm looking forward to see his revenge game against the US. But if you look at the group, we know France are probably the favorites since they're the hosts, and their roster is stacked top to bottom. I mean, it's just full of players who play in top 5 leagues, and good ones at that. I mean, if you look at their player pool, I think every single player on their roster is better than every single player on our roster, which is a slight cause for concern. However, we did get a draw with them in the past, so it's doable to get a result, but realistically, we should be aiming to beat Guinea and beat New Zealand, regardless of who's on their team. It's unacceptable to not get out of the group here. Finish second behind France, where we would probably play Argentina in the quarterfinals, which is a bit of an unfortunate draw because I think they're also one of the favorites. It's probably them, Spain, and France. And yeah, I mean, Argentina are so good. They have such a stacked team. They brought Julian Alvarez, of course, World Cup winner, former Libertadores winner, Champions League, the treble winner with Man City. Such a good player. I mean, as we all know, he's going to absolutely tear our backline to shreds if that does end up being the matchup. So my prediction for the Olympics as of now is that we will make it out of the group stage and then lose to Argentina in the quarterfinals, if that is the matchup. And then I think the last thing, quickly, that I almost forgot, the last thing to mention is that we do have 2 tune-up friendlies. And if they are streamed, we will watch them and cover them. I hope they are, because it's a good vantage point. When we covered the friendlies before the Copa America for the main USMNT, but we will be playing Paraguay on July 13th, and we will be playing Spain on July 18th. 2 teams that did qualify for the Olympics. Like I mentioned already, Spain are probably one of the favorites for the tournament, and Paraguay they won the CONMEBOL Olympic qualifying tournament that they had. So 2 very, very good teams that I think will provide good tests for us. Now, we did have good friendlies before Copa America, and we all know how the actual tournament turned out. So hopefully it's a different story for the Olympic team, but I think it's going to be some good friendlies. I'm looking forward to hopefully watching those and seeing how the boys perform, get a little bit of a perspective on what our level is before the tournament, which we will be covering in full. So stick around for that as summer progresses. But I think for now, that's going to be it. Thank you so much to everyone for watching. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of this Olympic roster? What changes would you have made? And I'm specifically curious, for the overage spots, do you agree with me? Would you have brought Daewon Jones, Walker, and Jesus Ferreira, or possibly a different striker? Or do you agree with what Marko Mitrovic, the head coach of this Olympic team, ultimately chose with Zimmerman, Miles Robinson, and Georgi Mihailovic? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching the video. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and I'll see you next time.